That is a meme worthy. That is a internet reaction waiting to happen.
What's that?
That jump scare.
Yeah.
That's like one of the like most insane jump scares I think I've ever seen.
Did you jump out of your seat?
I felt it in my toes. My whole body went rigid. Like it got me big time.
It's great. Yeah.
And it's like, if you're going to do a jump scare, I guess you fucking do it like that.
I guess to call back to the jump scare thing from last episode, I
literally wrote Jesus Christ in all caps in my notes when it happened.
I'll give Flanagan the benefit of the doubt too, is that we said, there were a ton of jump scares in the first half. They're not quite as many in the second half.
I think he slows down. He lets it build to this one.
Yeah. Welcome, guests, to episode 188 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm James.
And I'm Luke.
And this week we discussed the last 5 episodes of Mike Flanagan's 2018 series, The Haunting of Hill House. Okay, so last week we established that this series is a lot different when compared to Shirley Jackson's original work. I am curious, of course we've talked general thoughts in our last episode. Hopefully you're listening to that episode before this episode because... we're jumping in halfway, but I want to know, were you able to shift gears enough to sort of have this story separate from Shirley Jackson's work and enjoy it, or were you just constantly feeling like you had to compare it to Shirley Jackson's work?
Well, before I answer that, I think I'm going to have you hand me that plate of steaming crow over there, and I'm going to take a few bites of it.
Okay.
I'm not going to eat the whole plate. I'm not going to eat all the crow. But I am eating some today because there was a lot of greatness in the second half of this season. And I regretted a little bit of some of the stuff I said. I'm not going to eat the whole plate, though, because I do think some of my criticisms held true. I do still think there were some things that I didn't love. But for the most part, I was kind of blown away by the second half of the season. And especially a few different standout moments, which we'll talk about. And of course I'm comparing the whole time. I'm thinking of Shirley Jackson, and I do think a lot of my criticisms last week came from that comparison to the book, having just read it right before. But I do think Mike Flanagan is doing something really interesting here. He's sort of putting his own spin on it. And how much people like it is going to weigh heavily on whether or not they can vibe with this spin he puts on it. And it is a pretty different story, especially at the end. But I actually don't want to talk about the ending yet. I want to save that for the end of this episode because I think we should approach it chronologically as the story progressed and played out, because I think that's the most interesting way to talk about it.
Sure, yeah. I just want to ask you, from your perspective, do you think that Shirley Jackson herself would enjoy an adaptation like this? Of course, we're pure speculation, but does this feel like something that was lovingly done? Does it feel like it was taking a lot of liberties? What do you think, if you were to guess?
I'm really not comfortable saying, because I don't know, I'm pretty new to Shirley Jackson's work. I don't feel like I have a good sense of who she was as a person. So I can't really say. I will say that I think Mike Flanagan did this in a way that does feel like he's trying to honor her work and her vision. And I can definitely foresee a situation where she would like that.
Yeah.
But I'm not willing to put that on her yet, because I can't really say.
Good on you, because I was kind of setting you up here, because for what it's worth, horror author Stephen King, who holds considerable admiration for Jackson's novel, tweeted about the series. I don't usually care for this kind of revisionism, but this is great. Close to a work of genius, really. I think Shirley Jackson would approve, but who knows for sure. So I was kind of going to see if you agreed, but I mean, good on you for not taking the bait.
I mean, I'm sure he knows Shirley Jackson's, more about her, at least. I don't know if he knew her or anything, but he definitely knows more about her than I do. So I'll go with what Stephen King says there. I think that's probably fair assessment.
Yeah. So did you feel like there was a switching of gears? Did you think that like the first 5 episodes fit a certain type of horror, and did this change, or was this more of the same from the first half of the season?
I do think there was early on. I think Flanagan felt a urge to provide some early scares to like let people know what they're in for, to get them into the series and feel like, okay, I'm watching a series that's gonna have these kind of scares, and then he shifted gears into longer form, like slower developing scares that he really started to deliver on over the next few episodes, and those were some of the best. And the creepiness, there's like a bending of time that's going on. We talked about it in episode 5 a little bit, and that's like our first kind of introduction to that, the idea of the bent neck lady being actually Nell traveling through time. We are going to be spoiling obviously the rest of the series, so if you wanted our spoiler free thoughts, definitely listen to the last episode. But I loved it whenever they did that, and that was a continuing thing throughout, was like, we're going to have shown you different scenes, and then we're going to come in and show you how this moment in the future was actually interacting to this moment in the past. And you know what I kept thinking of in this, when I was seeing all of this? Like, what story this reminded me heavily of?
Not off the top of my head, what?
Stephen King's It.
Okay, yeah.
Because of the 2 timelines. Mm-hmm. Returning as adults. And there was...
So more of the book
a little
is what you're
bit,
saying, though. Not really the movies.
The book. Yeah. There was a little bit of that, like, interplay between past and present. Past and whatever. Yeah, past and present. Yes. There you go. Yeah. There was a little bit of that in that book, and just the idea of, like, revisiting and having it bleed over into each other, and it playing out simultaneously, in a way that was one of the things that you don't get a lot of in the adaptation, at least, of it. But that was one of the things I like most about that book, and we talked about. So I don't know. I was having like a flashback to our first project in kind of a fun way. And I could see that as almost being an inspiration. I don't know if that's true, but I know Flanagan is a fan of Stephen King's work, so it's definitely possible he was kicking that around in his head. And yeah, I mean, I have so many thoughts about each of these episodes, which I really want to get into. But before we do that, like, I do want to ask you, because this is your second time through. What was this experience like watching it a second time? Did you catch different stuff?
Yeah, I didn't, of course, remember every specific detail down to the very like minute ones. But, knowing the overall story and knowing the way that the timeline blends back together with how it ends, like, I don't want to jump too much into it, but basically, like, you can see it throughout, and getting to see certain scenes, it didn't, in some ways it makes it less scary, because the reason that this specter is appearing right now before this person is because, like, something, it's either the mother actually there or the sister potentially, like, there's a lot of that. But at the same time, it kind of creates like a more fun environment to be like, oh, look how scared this character is, even though because they don't know what's going on right now. And getting to see it through hindsight, in a way, is a really fun way to experience the series. I would definitely say wait a little while. Like, it's been at least a year or two for me since I've seen it, but which I think was a good period of time. But ultimately, I got a little more out of it, and it left me with more time to look around for more Easter eggs. I felt like I was really trying to dig in.
Did you find some?
Yeah, definitely saw some here and there.
Yeah, I think I did too, because I was on the lookout after we talked about it, and I'm sure I saw at least a few. I wrote a few down that I saw. So I do think that there is, and tell me if this is how you felt, like, there is something interesting about coming back to a story when you've kind of stripped away all of the surprise, and it's like knowing how a magic trick is done, and then watching someone perform the magic trick
and getting to appreciate it for the fact that they can pull it off.
Exactly. So you're able to maybe think more about craft and think about like, well, this is what they're trying to do here. I already know the reveal, so now I can just analyze how they're doing it, like from behind the scenes kind of point of view. So I was wondering if you were maybe like tying even more into the filmmaking that was going on and thinking about that kind of stuff. Yeah.
We're gonna get to this episode 6 here in a second, and I was just blown away. I realized how difficult episode 6 was in general the first time I watched it, but this time I was really like just fascinated by it and watching every single cut, even when they were hidden. So, we'll get into that episode in a second, but yes, definitely. I felt like I got to be on that same plane and think like as a creative, like what is Flanagan doing here? Is this something that I would have done necessarily, or what could have been done differently? So a fun experience and exercise. And I think like a lot of times that's why it's fun to revisit stuff like this that has like a lot to sink your teeth into.
Yeah. All right, man. We got to get into episode 6. You creaked the lid open a little bit, and
I did.
I'm so excited.
All the monsters
to talk
are coming
about
out.
this one.
I creaked it open. They're flooding out. So, all right. Episode 6 is called Two Storms. The episode alternates between two storms. One, the family experienced in the past at Hill House. The other, in the present, the night before Nell's funeral, with the Crane family meeting at the funeral parlor to view her body, finally together in the same room after years. At Hill House, Nell goes missing. Olivia sees spirits and enters a fugue state, acting strangely. Nell reappears, shaken, and states that she had been right in front of her family the whole time, yelling, but they couldn't see or hear her. In the present, as the Cranes argue, odd things happen. Steve sees the ghost of his mother, the power goes out, and someone places buttons on Nell's eyes. The family demands answers from Hugh about what really happened, leading to confrontations. Shirley catches Theo and Kevin together in a storage room. Nell's coffin falls over by itself, startling the Cranes into shock. Nell's spirit as the bent neck lady is present in the room the whole time, though no one sees her.
Yeah. So that summary is of what happens in the plot, but it does nothing to talk about this episode really, because this episode was incredible.
Definitely.
I think this is an achievement that is something I wasn't expecting in this show. By my estimation, it at least has the appearance of being, I think, 3 significant oners in a row.
Meant to almost basically look like it's one. There's a couple of cuts from past to present. Is that what you're counting? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, it's one long oneer to open the episode, one long oneer in the past, and then one long oneer back in the present.
There are definitely like splice cuts, and I believe.
Yeah, I think there is, and like ultimately, I don't care. Like we talked about this in Children of Men, right? Like those incredible shots were like, oh, there's a couple of hidden like I don't care. Like
it doesn't matter. Yeah,
it doesn't matter. Like I couldn't spot them. Like I had a couple of points where I was like, ooh, maybe they snuck something there. There was a flash of lightning. Maybe they were able to do it during a flash. Like but like I ultimately don't care. Like there's a pan where it like in the pans were typically pretty slow, but I'm like they still could maybe splice something in there.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter.
No,
the effect is awesome, and
and the amount of planning that it takes is still just as impressive. It's the planning and then the execution of actually getting it done and it working it's all we've talked about sets and how hectic they can get and how many moving parts there are for something like this. The camera work that has to happen, people running around the room, actors switching like with their childhood actors and stuff, and it's madness.
And I was kind of losing it, man. Like, so this is one of those things where it's like, I know that I've changed as a viewer because I started out the episode just kind of like enjoying watching. I'm caught into the story. They're standing over Nell. They're going back and forth, and then all of a sudden it like looks into the back, and the 2 guys arrive, Luke and Steve, and then we sit down with them for a minute, and then Luke is gonna approach the cast, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, I don't think this is cut yet. Like it just like dawns on me.
It's a feeling too, right? It's not even like it's a realization, but at the same time it's like a feeling that it puts in you where it's like, oh, this feels like something's different.
Something's weird, right? And I was thinking that it feels unblinking, and it feels it's maybe the most transportative. That's one of the things I love about these oners is I feel like I'm in that room because, in real life, other than when you blink your eyes, like you blink your eyes and you don't really move much, but like, so for the most part, you feel this like continuous perspective, and that's what you get in a oner. You're like continuously, you are the camera. And so in that sense, I was at this, wake. It's not really a wake. It was like the night before the wake, but this mini wake they were having with their family. And it felt unblinking and personal and close. And I also started geeking out about the idea of it and imagining what it was like to shoot it. And I started over the episode.
Yeah, awesome.
So at about the 10-minute mark, when I realized what was happening, I went all the way back to the beginning because I wanted to watch from the beginning, thinking, okay, is this all one shot? And I would love to know what you might have found out in the behind the scenes stuff about this episode, because I was like, I started looking at the time, and I was like, I wrote it down. I think this first oneer is 14 minutes long. There may probably hid some cuts in there. I don't know. But I didn't see them. Doesn't mean they weren't there, but they were at least very well hidden.
I don't have specifics on like the amount of time per takes and stuff like that. But and another thing that's like really deceiving is sometimes when people cross frame.
Should we describe what a oneer is, just in case anyone doesn't know?
Sure. I mean, it's one continuous shot. So like the camera rolls without cuts, and it's a for however long, and everything that happens within that shot is a oneer.
Yeah. So as opposed to the regular way you film, where you're doing a bunch of like smaller moments that are spliced together, you have to rely on everything that happens in that take is what you're going to use.
You have to think about every department. Yeah. Set design has to be on point.
And if one person screws up one little thing, you got to reset the entire thing and start over.
Yeah, and in that way, it's also like theater it's a theatrical performance for the actors, because they've remembered all of those lines, the exact movements where people need to move, rooms need to move.
The amount of blocking of like where to move and where the camera. You have to also to be very aware where the camera is going to be. Like at one point, the camera backs up between Steve and Luke, and they're like leaning down together. And I was thinking that they probably leaned down real quick after the camera has passed, so that it looks like it didn't even have enough room to pass through, but it probably did, like there's so many clever things like that and that's the level of difficulty is so high, because if you catch that movement, then you're done. You have to start over.
Exactly.
I'm just blown away by it.
I'm sure that they hid more cuts than we're aware of. And like what I was going to say is one thing that they can do really well is if someone passes a cross frame, and it doesn't even have to completely cover the lens. It can be the same like sort of shot design completely, like just like in the same area. If someone crosses frame, it's an easy way to sort of like splice those two things together, and it tends to work really well.
Yeah. So even if it was like, instead of 14 minutes, it was like
3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5
3
minutes.
or 4 or 5, 3-minute scenes, that's still incredible.
And like you're saying, it's not like it's a lockdown tripod shot. It's not on sticks just sitting there for 3 or 4 minutes. The camera is constantly in motion. So you have to think about the people in the camera department, which I'm very familiar with, who are having to assist the camera operator and like, brace him, can't let him fall over, help guide where the next landing spot is. And it's amazing stuff, and it's like true filmmaking. Like we've talked about the planning that goes into it, and then not to mention the spooky things that they're threading into this scene. So it's not a dramatic normal drama oneer. This is like they have special effects going on in the background. There are like things need to move around, things need to change. It's very like
they
you said,
swap out the whole cast for their child cast, and then the camera's just kind of going in a circle, and then it comes back around and it's all the adults again, and they have about, I think I counted like 14 seconds or so to have made that swap and be in position. I'm like, and nobody was huffing and puffing from running. Like it's a magic trick, and it's pretty incredible. And then the idea that they're going to then stack that with 2 more. Like, that's an episode that if I could just go back and watch that one again and just try and imagine what it would have been like. Because then the one in the house is also incredible. There's so many cool things going on in that scene.
Yeah, specifically Mike Flanagan went into this episode and was like, I want to do it all the way. I want to do everything. This episode, like you said, it's an achievement.
This is a showcase episode too, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is probably the one you send to the Emmys and you go, have a look at this one.
You hang your hat on this episode for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like you said, and it kind of makes up for some stuff maybe in the beginning that was a little more cheesy and like easy for in terms of, in the grand scheme of things, for filmmaking. Having something like this, you're like, oh, okay, well, like we're building to these things. We're building to some of these bigger moments.
And when this episode happened, I immediately had some regrets about last week. It's like, I maybe went a little too hard. And like, it's funny because I have listened back to that episode, and I wasn't like really harsh on it, but I definitely think you could listen. People are gonna listen to that episode and think I didn't like it.
Well, and you've stated your case was because you were comparing it to Shirley Jackson's original work. So ultimately, like that was your point. That was what the hill you were willing to die on.
In my defense, I guess. But like, I still do have some criticisms that come up later on and stuff. So I don't think this show's perfect or anything, and we'll talk about it. But I don't know. I came in pretty hard last week, and I don't know. I was impressed. Mm-hmm. This is an impressive episode.
What do you make of like all the relationships, everything coming to a point, everything really built to this? Obviously, all the characters together, and then their father comes back officially, and how they interact with him.
It's the first like reunion of the family, so it's a big dramatic moment. You know, you have dead Eleanor. And then I just keep thinking of like that moment where Steve looks over and he sees her standing there, and then he looks away, and then he looks back and she's gotten closer, and I don't know, which is all done in the same single take, so it's very cool. And then how about the buttons on the eyes? Is that a Coraline reference? I was thinking of Coraline, man.
Yeah. So you just reminded me of one thing that I have to talk about, and that's when Hugh is walking through the like funeral parlor and then turns a corner, and then it becomes the old Hill House, and he's walking around Hill House,
and it's a continuous shot. It's very cool.
Continuous shot, and the way that they either again hit a cut somewhere in there, or set design had recreated like a portion of either the parlor or the
I mean, they probably had both sets, you know, and they just had them connect. I don't know that.
Unless there was unless they were actually on location, you know, it's always
it seems
possible.
like the house is probably a set. That big ass house interior, that's got to be a set, but it's a convincing one.
Yeah. So that was just an overall like what an amazing like practical effect to go from basically the present into the past and be like
the storm honestly in both, and it really, the storm is such a brilliant idea. It ties the two moments together in this weird time travel-y thing. Right, like it's like the storm is occurring in both moments.
Well, and both storms feel supernatural as well.
Yeah.
Right, like the one of them is like banging on the door and stuff. It's not necessarily the storm doing that, but and then the other one is like no one else was getting rain in the area, and it's just Hill House getting pounded by the storm.
I spotted a few ghosts in this one. This is a big one because I think like every now and then when the lightning would flash, there was one time there was a person sitting in a chair. And the lightning flashed in the background, and then like later the person's gone. I was just starting to notice that. I do think at one time one of the statues had turned its head, but I'm not 100% sure.
No, 100%. I saw that as well. Yeah. It was turned to the first. It was pointing forward, then it was turned to the right, and then it was pointing back forward.
Okay. Yeah. So and I was thinking like those statues got to move sometimes because they're so creepy, and like there's so many of them, and they're so gigantic that I'm like, you could probably just sell the statues and make a lot of money. Like those are really elaborate like marble statues. But anyway, very cool stuff. This episode is my favorite of the entire series. And there are a bunch of other good ones here at the end, but now I do want to ask you about this because also real quick, there was a tricycle in the door when he's in the house. Mm-hmm. I was like, that's a Shining reference, right?
Gotta be, right?
Gotta be it. Okay. So, yeah. Because there's kind of like we're lost in a maze feel as we're walking around through the halls, and we know Flanagan's such a big King fan. Anyway, mm-hmm. I think that's what that was.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you, one thing that is a potential problem of these oners is once you notice them, I was having a little bit of trouble at times getting into this, like watching what was actually happening and not just geeking out about the technique. Like
it's
the
tough,
technique, it almost draws attention to itself once you know it's happening.
I think it's one of those things obviously it's better on a second viewing. You know, you get more time to pay attention to it. But at the same time, I don't know. I think it's one of those things that's like in a filmmaker's toolbox that like they'll use, and as you get more accustomed to seeing them, maybe it'll be less like shocking and less of something that'll distract you. But
I also think that like, before you know what you're looking for, sometimes you can't even put your finger on what made something so incredible. You're like, man, that was because like the first time I saw Children of Men, I didn't realize that those scenes were oners.
Right.
Like not consciously, subconsciously, I get the effect still works on me, but it wasn't until later that I was like, oh, that didn't cut. You know what I mean? And so I could see that, like, if you're not someone who's thinking about this sort of stuff,
Yeah.
you might not even notice why it feels different, except for it feels weird and different because it is.
I can see it being distracting, but I don't see it being like a filmmaker deciding not to do it based on that. You know what I mean? Because I think it's always going to be like sort of immersive and different. And it's like, there's a reason why like Birdman exists as a movie. Like the entire movie is like a pseudo oner, and like that, like it's a technique that is like, for one, really hard to pull off, but also like creates a really fun effect that's really memorable and immersive, like I said.
Yeah, it's really good, and like I would love to watch, like, if there's any behind the scenes stuff about them shooting that. I just think it's so cool.
Yeah.
Like every time I've seen behind the scenes stuff of people shooting like really long extended shots, there's like a ballet of movement going on beyond the camera.
Oh yeah,
so if you have like a camera of what's
there was
going
that
on
famous
set,
one that
all these people moving
a couple years ago.
A
couple years ago, there was that Jim Carrey Showtime show where he was like, it was like vignettes of his life. His character's life, and it was like them sitting on the couch, and then like they would turn the camera 90 degrees in like a whip pan, and it would be like them in a different setting outside somewhere laying down in bed, like, and they just kept turning around the entire room, and set design and camera team was working together to like recreate each moment as they were just like doing a slow moving turn. And
have you ever been part of like
not this big,
not that big, but like a shot that has some sort of big change that has to happen without a cut?
Yeah,
where
absolutely.
You're like running around, stuff like that. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, it's like, it's all, like you said, it's kind of ballet. It's like coordinated dance, or, you know, synchronized swimming or something like that. It's like it's planned so meticulously that everyone knows what they have to do. And then of course it's always going to be hard to pull off because there's so many variables, but it's a lot of fun. And then the
actors, like, I can't imagine how hard it has to be for them, right? Because they're part of that ballet of movement, yet they also have to have that performance queued up and ready to go as soon as it gets back on them. And for this one, it was incredibly emotional, right? Like this family, like, doing battle with each other in some ways, and reconnecting and crying and you know, being scared. Like there was a big moment for Steve where he's at the coffin, and Luke's given all this emotion, and just all of them, honestly, and I'm like, well, man, this is so hard.
Theater. It's literally theater at that point, you know, like they're on stage, they're on stage, and the camera's recording the performance. The other thing is that some of the characters over the course of this scene are getting more intoxicated. Yeah. And that was another thing, that like the subtlety of that, and like playing drunk or later in the scene over the course of a couple minutes.
I will say Theo drank so much that I don't think she would have been standing by the end of the episode, but I was like, she was looking drunk and she falls over at one point, but I'm like, you would be unconscious. Yeah. As someone who is twice the size of her, and, you know, has had my days of where I've had quite a bit to drink. Yeah. She was really pounding that alcohol, and then she wants like another bottle of vodka at the end. And I'm like, okay, we're getting a little silly here, but I know that it's played up for TV.
Yeah. So, I mean, fantastic episode. Is there anything specific that happens within the episode you want to touch on?
I mean, honestly, it's very cool, right? Like this storm is very important. It really is like a turning point, I think, for the family. I do like how we establish one of what is going to become a couple of touchstone points in time. We see the breaking of the windows. And that becomes a touchstone wherever we revisit them, like cleaning up the glass. We know, okay, this is after the storm, right? And I think even sometimes it says it in text at the bottom, after the storm, before the storm, stuff like that. So it is an important moment. I think it's a moment for everybody to realize the danger of the house, and then the deterioration of Olivia's mind. This is a big part because she gets separated from the father, and she, you know, is like wandering the halls and being, you know, removed and losing time clearly. And I love that later on we get some of those gaps in time and we understand it more. It's just very well crafted, and I love the intricacy of those moments and how Flanagan wove them all together. And I you know, a lot of the stuff that happens early on, we come back to in a way, and we show like, okay, you know, this wasn't just banging at the door for no reason. It was actually these characters, and these characters are on the other side, and they're banging on the same door. They don't realize it, because one of them is in the red room, which we'll get to. It's just very cool. And I am impressed.
This episode has like some emotional peaks that are so. I mean, like, really, it's like everyone's brought to the absolute peak of their emotional threshold in this episode. And like, I love that, like, Nell's coffin falling over, like, just brings them all back to realizing they're a family and coming back together in that way.
Because they're tearing each other apart here, right? Like, everybody's fighting. There's a moment where Theo and Shirley's husband, I can't remember his name, looks like they're
Kevin.
kissing. She catches them kissing in the hall. And it's like a storage room or whatever. And they found out about the reveals about the taking of the money.
Yep.
Which is a big like thing, and Shirley's so angry at everybody, and just a lot of high drama, excellent performances, and just fantastic filmmaking. And honestly, like, I could go through and analyze each of these oners. I would like to do it, but we have 4 more episodes to talk about, so I think we got to move into episode 7.
Yeah, episode 7 is called Eulogy. It is revealed that Hugh often talks to Olivia like she is still there. He is able to make amends with Theo, who says she should have reached out to him. During the funeral, he tries to reconnect with the rest of his children. In the past, Hugh assesses the house for storm damage. Mr. Dudley assists, revealing some history of the house's previous occupants. Mr. Dudley suggests that the erratic Olivia needs to spend time away from the house, revealing why he and Mrs. Dudley never come to the house at night. Hugh and Olivia agree she needs to spend some time away when her behavior becomes more disturbing. Hugh inadvertently uncovers the body of William Hill, the original owner, who had bricked himself up inside the house's walls. Olivia's ghost attacks Luke, then Hugh and Theo. Luke goes missing after the funeral, stealing Shirley's wallet and Theo's car.
I mean, another good episode. I really liked this mold stuff, as you know, but our listeners may not. What was it, 2019? I had a water disaster in my condo, and we had to move out and tear out everything, and I was out of my house for a long time.
And it kept being extended, like longer than you thought, and it just seemed like it was never going to end at one period.
Water damage is the absolute worst, and I was triggered by this episode.
Yeah.
Man. The freaking mold, which like we didn't have a lot, but it starts to set in fast. And just the tearing everything out, and the idea of the water damage is just, oh my God. Anybody who's ever had to deal with it knows well how bad that is.
And you can't help but feel like it's just not fair for the family when you're watching it, because it is like the supernatural mold that cannot be defeated, and it's happening so quickly, and it's building up, and
I love the scratching detail too, though. Like we're hearing the rats, and I didn't know where they were going with it, but the reveal that it is actually the original Hill, and he had bricked himself up somehow in there, and he tried to scratch his way out, and that's what they're hearing. That reminded me of like a scary stories to tell in the dark kind of tale or something, like a very old school, and the scratching was actually the man who was trying to get out. But cool. Like, I like that,
And then eventually we realized that he's the bowler hat man.
Yeah, bowler hat man.
And there's an explanation for why his limbs are so long, I think. Can't remember the specifics, but they say something about like him being trapped in there. He felt so small, and then eventually he was so large later. I don't know, something like that. In death.
I don't remember that. Yeah, like maybe he must. Yeah, I don't know. That's interesting. Because he's super tall later on, especially. I will say some of the ghosts lost a little bit of their spookiness the more I knew about them. The less mysterious they were.
Yeah, the little boy maybe, or the grandma.
The sort of flapper woman.
Yeah.
Who I don't know. She was just okay. She had her accent. I didn't quite buy.
I remember trying to understand and remember if that's how people actually spoke at the time too. I remember a couple times I was like, was that sounds like more modern or something.
Yeah, I don't think it wasn't very convincing. I don't want to slam her because I'm sure it was a difficult ask, but
creepy enough. She was almost like the voice, the mouthpiece of the house at certain times.
Yeah, that gets into some of my criticisms I had later on too. But at this point, I'm still very, very happy. I'm still loving everything, and like. So
the Dudleys, you want to talk about their situation?
Yeah, they have a weird situation, right? Like we hear this story of this kid who died, this baby who died, stillborn. and then how they can hear the baby crying
At night.
at night, and so that's why they don't come to the house anymore at night. So we're getting a lot more background, sort of filling in the blanks of the book, because the Dudleys are kind of mysterious. We don't really know why they are the way they are.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, okay, that's interesting, and like, we don't hear anything about the other daughter that they have here, so I was left still like wondering what's going on for a while with this other character, but that's okay. It was a clever reveal. I do like the cutting of the hand is another moment that becomes a touchstone, and whenever we see the mangled hand then like we know, okay, this is after that moment. So we get a few of these like touchstones in time for the viewer that really help us situate ourselves when we get all these extended flashbacks. And man, what a gnarly fucking cut that was.
Oh yeah. Sorry. Like,
it doesn't look like the kind of thing you just wrap a bandage around and you're fine.
No way.
That needs some stitches, man.
It was mangled.
Yeah, but it's fine, it's a show. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a good episode. There was actually, I noticed that the camera didn't cut from Mr. Dudley for a really long time when he was giving his monologue.
Yeah.
It was like a continuous cut of him just telling the story and emoting and like.
Big moment.
I was like, well done, good,
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that was a big moment for that character to really deliver, and it does. I mean, it's like their story going up until the end is like just brutal and like, I don't know, and then yet also just melancholy a little, and like it's a very interesting, like it kind of situates, and we'll get into this with the house, but how the house isn't maybe inherently evil, but it's also like it's just like eternal, like it's like it's force.
Powerful.
Yeah.
In this version, and the mold man in the wall that he sees, that was a really cool, creepy moment. Taking the Polaroid and seeing this face. It looked kind of like Bowler Hat Guy. I'm not sure if it was supposed to be him or not. Maybe I can't. Maybe there's a little bit of a hat in the picture he took. And then later it's gone. So I'm like, was he freed from his prison down there, and that's why it's gone, or what? I don't know. In the present, we have Luke has disappeared, and they are trying to figure out where he went. I think this is the episode with the Halloween. It's like Halloween night, and there's knocking on the door, and then Theo and Shirley experience the knocking together, and also Theo and the father experience the apparition. So we're having the like supernatural is bleeding over into the real world.
Yeah, I think that's a little bit into next episode, but in this episode it's where like the dream house gets destroyed and it's like on the ground, and they see
so it's
like,
right at the end of the
Theo,
episode.
They see Theo and Hugh see this like thing crawling out at the last second, and she's like, we need to tell them, and sort of ends around that.
Well, I do like I think it happens here, but maybe it's the next episode. But Steve proposes this sort of theory, and he's been talking about this, where he says there's a sickness in our family. It's a mental illness, and we see things, and he thought he was immune to it, but now he's like realized that he's seeing things too, and he has this like theory that all of them have a shared mental illness, and I really liked that detail because it's kind of the shit that you'd come up with, right? Like when your rationality hits a wall, like sometimes you're gonna try and find a way to explain something, and I could definitely see myself going, well, shit, we all got schizophrenia,
right.
We're all seeing shit, but I don't know. It's just it's interesting, right? Because it blurs that line of like, at what point are you unwilling to admit reality because it doesn't jive with what you perceive to be reality? It's a fun concept, and I'm glad that they dealt with it still here.
Yeah. And it's clear whether or not they have mental illness and schizophrenia or they're seeing ghosts, they all actually do have some form of mental illness, like that they're having to like cope with or deal with in some ways.
Yeah. All right, let's get into 8.
Okay, so episode 8 is Witness Marks. Stephen and Hugh drive around to find Luke. Stephen believes the family's issues are mental illness and explains he underwent a vasectomy to avoid spreading his family's sickness on. At the funeral parlor, Shirley and Theo have an argument over Theo and Kevin in the storage room. The family discovers that Luke is on his way to Hill House. Hugh reveals to Stephen that Stephen has been seeing ghosts all along without realizing they were ghosts, and that none of them are mentally ill. He reveals that the treehouse Stephen and Luke speak of at Hill House was never there, and that the cranes are like an unfinished meal to the house. Shirley and Theo also begin driving to Hill House to save Luke. Nell's ghost scares them, and Theo breaks down, explaining that Shirley misunderstood her and Kevin. Nothing happened. The sisters reconcile. Luke tries to burn down Hill House, only to be attacked by the ghosts of Poppy Hill, William Hill's insane wife.
Some of that outline even underlines some of the stuff I was saying before. I do think Flanagan tends to over-explain a little bit. I like it when there's still some mystery and there's still some unknown, some ambiguity about what is actually happening. And instead, it does feel like almost everything gets an explanation.
Yeah, I do feel like that's a choice, right? You know, of course, like, I think I agree with you. I would rather have a story that's a little more nuanced in that way. But, you know, I feel like he wanted to make audiences happy. So
yeah.
But I agree with you. I think in a perfect version
of this, every ghost is explained.
Everything's tied up in a nice bow.
Is tied up. Yeah. So there's not a lot of that like mystery that lingers with you, and you find yourself returning to again and again, thinking.
Let us
like,
just
what
like live with
that
and like stew it over ourselves and kind of draw our own conclusions.
And there's so much of that in the book, right?
Yeah.
Like that's like the whole vibe of the book.
Right.
So that is a big change. But so in this episode, one thing I wanted to talk to you about was the it's like kind of a filmmaking thing, right? The car scenes. I felt like these were very classic old filmmaking style car scenes because I was like, they're definitely like not in a car. Like they're in a car, but they're not like on the road. It's definitely got those like screens in the background and, you know, lights to try and emulate like traffic. But every now and then you get an outer shot to like make to you know, make it feel like you're actually in a car. But I was like, I feel like I don't see that much these days anymore. But I'm sure it's cheaper to do it that way, or maybe it's just a decision so that you can really focus on the performances and not have to worry about being in an actual car and driving around or being pulled behind another car or something.
Yeah. So I've done this. I've been on set for a couple of these. One of them, the more elaborate way of doing it, is putting the car on a trailer and having a truck pull.
I feel like that's normally what I see done.
Yeah. So that is expensive, and you know you have to find the roads that you want, and you're dealing with variables on the road, obviously. Like what you're talking about, I've also seen it done where you're in like a sound stage, and you have, like you said, some sort of screens or something done in order to emulate the road going by. Some of the times you'll see it done with green screen, but you can always kind of tell when it's green screen on the outside.
What do you think this one was?
I think it was a little bit of both of the trailer and the and maybe on a stage somewhere, because like you can emulate a lot of the things, but at some point you're gonna have to have like streetlights going by.
There might have been some shots.
Yeah, you can tell some of the time that it's like really they're actually like woods on the side of the road, something like that. But most of the time, what I will say is like if people are paying attention enough to realize what you're doing, you either did it incorrectly, or the scene isn't that interesting. You know what I mean?
Or they're me and I'm watching for a podcast.
You're just looking for it, yeah. If it, like I said, if it's a
because I was into the scene. I thought the scenes were good, but I was also like, I was paying attention to how it was being made. I was trying to, at least.
And that's part of the peeking into the matrix, right? That we do here.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. It's the same. I have the same problem with books all the time now. Exactly. It's like I'm seeing the code, and sometimes it's hard to actually appreciate the story. But I was able to still appreciate the performances going on. One thing I really liked was Steven is driving the car for a long time, and he's telling his story. He's talking about this vasectomy. I will say I personally found it a little frustrating the way that pregnancy was positioned as like something where it's like if you're normal and like a healthy person without baggage, like you're gonna have kids, and him not wanting to have kids because of his trauma was like meant he was broken, and it's something that needed to be repaired.
Well, I think it was less like an issue of that. It was more of an issue of him not like communicating about that, right?
Yeah.
So like it was.
Well, him lying about it's definitely fucked up, but and at the end we seem to get some implication that maybe he is reversed order and now he's going to have kids himself and like he's been fixed. I just personally find that a little frustrating because it's like some people just don't want kids,
right?
But I will say that's not what the show's trying to say, and ultimately I'm okay with it. You know what I mean? Like I feel like the show wasn't trying to say everyone needs to have kids. It was like this particular guy has this particular reason,
Right.
and like, you
I
know,
mean,
what I
it was
this thing's
clear
standing
that
in his
that
way.
that his wife wanted to have kids, and he
Yeah.
knew that going in, and just sort of like was awful about it and lied, and
Yeah.
didn't communicate. So, um,
Yeah.
but I agree. Like, I don't like to see the average movie that sort of frames it that way tends to say like normal people have kids. That's the normal thing to do.
It's hard to like point at any one moment and say this is a problem. Although there are some that are like that, it's more of like a general trend, right? Like if
Yeah.
you watch a lot of movies, that's the
How
message.
people are happy when they have kids, and if you're
Yeah,
not, you
and
don't
if-
get
and
it.
if
You
you
don't
don't
have a
have
fulfilling
kids,
life, and
yeah. Yeah, something's wrong with you. You're not going to be happy. That's not you've missed out on your calling in life, and like I just don't believe that.
It's
to be true.
propaganda. All right.
It's child rearing propaganda. Damn it.
Oh man.
Happy Father's Day.
One thing that I really liked was the way that Hugh was talking about the cranes as an unfinished meal. The most dangerous place for them to be in the entire world was back at the house. The way that frames it with Luke like rushing back to the house, like trying to destroy it. And then ultimately like doing what you said you didn't want to see, which is the house get burned down. He attempts to, and it
Yeah,
and
I
it
know.
fails.
He's attempts to, and I was like, oh my God, are we burning down the house in episode 8? What are we going to do for the last? I thought, it's funny because like some of my predictions were pretty close.
Yeah.
Not all of them, but they were pretty close. And like the burning down thing, I was like, oh God, it's happening already. That does remind me though. I wanted to finish my thought from before. Steven's driving the car when all that happens, and then it switches. They get to the gas station, and then the father's driving the car, and the father's like, "No, now you're gonna listen to me."
Yeah.
And then he like lays down the story about what happened, and tells him that there was no tree house, which is a big reveal.
Mm-hmm.
We're like, wait a minute, what the fuck is this tree house then? And he's like, you've been seeing ghosts all along. There wasn't a clockmaker. All this stuff, and I like that he was then driving the car too, because I felt like that worked metaphorically of like he's in control now, and it's not really explained why he is all of a sudden driving, but he is.
He just says, "I'm driving." Yeah.
Yeah, I'm driving now.
So we got to talk about Shirley and Theo in this episode too, because they're kind of the other half to the episode.
Yeah, I thought your favorite part was going to be the punch to the boob.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, it was a funny part.
That was a funny
It was a
moment.
sisterly thing, right? Like it felt very familial, like fighting.
I was like, I wondered if that was an accident. I was like, did this accidentally happen in the scene? And then they're like, we're gonna roll with that because it was so funny.
Maybe, yeah. I'm not sure.
I don't know. Very funny though.
Them coming back together and then sort of talking through Shirley's like denial of everything. She just doesn't want to believe the things that she knows. She knows that Theo has abilities. She knows that, Kevin actually loves her, and like she kind of wants to think something more happened between Theo and Kevin. And when it's all out on the table and explained, and then ultimately in a similar way to Nell's body, the casket falling, Olivia's like screaming in their face, like sort of pulls them back together when the emotional peak happens in the scene where they're driving. And then Theo gets out and cries, and Shirley's there, and she's like, clearly we're both seeing a ghost at the same time.
Yeah, I think you're underselling that moment. That is a meme worthy. That is a internet reaction waiting to happen.
What's that?
That jump scare.
Yeah.
That's like one of the like most insane jump scares I think I've ever seen.
Did you jump out of your seat?
I felt it in my toes. My whole body went rigid. Like it got me big time.
It's great. Yeah.
And it's like, if you're going to do a jump scare, I guess you fucking do it like that.
I guess to call back to the jump scare thing from last episode,
I literally wrote Jesus Christ in all caps in my notes when it happened.
I'll give Flanagan the benefit of the doubt too, is that we said, there were a ton of jump scares in the first half. They're not quite as many in the second half.
I think he slows down. He lets it build to this one.
Yeah.
It fucking gets me, man. And I'm gonna
one.
like, I bet there's like compilation videos of people losing their shit during that online. I'm gonna have to go look up because what a jump scare, man.
It was
that was
intense one.
Wild. Did it get you at all the second time, or did you know it was coming?
I think I knew it was coming too much. Yeah. I'm sure I jumped, but it wasn't like what the reaction was probably the first time.
I mean, like, I'm not someone who reacts much to stuff like that.
Yeah.
And like, I know there are people who do. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I can see people throwing things at their TVs. Like, I can just imagine wildness happening.
Yeah. I will say, like, in the first half, I remember I was watching it with my girlfriend, and she like, we've seen it before, and there was one scene that happened. I can't remember what it is right now, which is super unfortunate for a podcast, but it was the same situation, like completely jumped out of her seat. And I was like, you didn't remember that was going to happen? And she's like, no.
Yeah, there's some jumps early on, but nothing came close to this moment.
Yeah, it's a big one.
Right, just right in between their faces while they're having this like super emotional like back and forth as sisters, and then just that fucking scream. Oh God, it got me. But yeah, then he lights the fire and immediately the flames spread and then go out, and then he gets grabbed from behind. The other thing is like he poured that fucking gasoline all over himself. I was like, I don't know if the intention was to burn himself or just be really sloppy in the way he was doing it, but the ghost saved his life in that moment because he was about to burn the fuck out of himself.
Yeah, I continue. I think Luke is one of my favorite characters to follow. Just because he's got such an interesting story. And nearing this in this next episode, some crazy stuff goes down, and I want to know if you were hook, line, and sinker on this one. So let me read the synopsis, and we'll get to that. Episode 9 is Screaming Mimis. In the past, Olivia begins having disturbing paranormal experiences in the house. She sees a vision of the corpses of adult Nell and Luke and encounters the ghost of Poppy Hill, who tells her the world outside will devour her children and she needs to keep them safe. Disoriented and scared, Olivia and Hugh decide she should take a break and travel to her sister Janet's house. However, Olivia, now unstable and influenced by the house, never goes, and the family's last night at the mansion starts to unfold. A delusional Olivia takes Nell, Luke, and Abigail, who was sleeping over, for a tea party in the Red Room, which is now open. Hugh realizes Olivia has poisoned the tea with rat poison to kill the kids, believing this is the only way to keep them safe from the world. He saves Luke and Nell, but it's too late to save Abigail. Terrified, he hurriedly gets the kids out of the house while Olivia, wanting to wake up from her horrible dream, jumps off the top of the spiral staircase. The thing that I was mentioning that I wanted to ask if you thought was actually going to happen is the little girl drinking rat poison. When it was happening, did you think that she was actually going to die there, or did you think something was going to be done to save her?
Well, I wasn't sure if she was a ghost or if she was real at that point, because I think I did write down, like, is this the Dudley's daughter? Because Mrs. Dudley mentions having a daughter, I think, before this or during this episode. So I'm like, maybe that's who this Abigail girl is.
It is a weird reveal though, right? Like like this whole time we've been hearing Luke talk about his imaginary friend, everyone's saying Abigail. Yeah. And then she's actually there for the first time, like in the house, and spent the night, and everybody said she could spend the night. Yeah,
it's weird. But this episode is mostly good. I did have, I still don't know how I feel about Mrs. Screaming Mimi here.
Yeah.
Some of her, like, again, it's maybe a little bit too much. Like it's a very long scene of her sort of monologuing with the mother, and I like where it goes, these moments, and then like her beginning to have her sort of disassociation, and I love like finding out why she was or like what dream she was having, and all these moments where she like said, oh, I was having such a terrible dream, and like I liked seeing what was actually leading up to that, and the moment where she's in the bedroom talking to the twins. I think that's in this episode where that gets revealed, like what she was actually doing. And we're building thematically this idea that she wants to keep her children safe in Hill House, away from the world, when the world is what's going to hurt them, because she's seen a vision of the future where she sees them as adults dead. She sees the twins dead. And that is thematically tied to the book, in the way that Eleanor in the book feels home. She feels like she's come home ultimately at the end, even though that is a lie. But it's like this tragedy of her surrendering to the house. And in that way, the mother, Olivia, also feels very close to Eleanor. I was thinking how it seems like much of Eleanor was given to Olivia. Some of it was given to Shirley as well. It was like Eleanor was almost split into 3 characters, I think, for the show.
Yeah,
maybe
Nell,
even 4.
Nell as well,
Like everybody gets a little piece of her. But I would say Nell, obviously, Shirley, and Olivia are the strongest. All 3 feel like they're pieces of Eleanor from the book.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciated getting Olivia's like point of view through the story, and getting to see through her eyes, and then us realizing that this entire time that we've been seeing her, when she's creating this blueprint, like all of these times, that it's being revealed that she's not able to keep it together as much as we think she is, and it's further along. I love
that reveal of the dream home being repeated over and over and over again. That was very cool.
Very good. And like how Hugh must feel in that moment too, because you don't want to freak her out, and you want to be able to like talk to her and say like, come on, let's get you out of the house for a little while, and how stressful and how tough that is going to be for him dealing with all the stuff that's going on. But like she's like had been holding a screwdriver to his throat at one point too. Like it was getting really bad.
Yeah, if you wake up and your wife is like got a screwdriver pressed into your throat, you should be worried.
Yeah, it's probably the house that you're living in, honestly.
It's probably the house, yeah. No, I mean, there's lots of good stuff here. I like Nell having to cut the stitch out of her own mouth so that she could talk when she was in the, like there's a lot of these like dark moments that work really well. I did think there was and tell me if you think I'm right. There was a couple of the ghosts in the background moments that were so obvious here that I felt like were keying us in, and I almost felt like Flanagan was telling the viewer like, "Hey, you might have missed some of these." Like within the text of the show itself. I know it's not text, but like it was kind of like because like there's one point in particular in the kitchen where like we just saw the clockmaker, which we know is a ghost now because they told us. And then she walks into the kitchen and there's this like face in the glass looking down at the children while they're talking. And it shows it in several different views. It's very present there. And I'm like, okay, I don't know how you missed that one, but it is still kind of in the background. Like they're not looking at it. And that was when I thought like, maybe this is Flanagan trying to say, hey, there's some of this stuff going on in the background. And maybe that's why like people might think like, oh, I'm actually going to go back and look for these things.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't very subtle, but it was subtle enough to where I felt like it was like lampshading. Like, hey, there are things hidden in the background.
Right. To say like there's more than, if you're seeing these ones, there's clearly more that you haven't seen.
You wonder what you've missed in the past when that moment happens. Yeah. So I liked that actually.
And we actually got to see like the little boy in the wheelchair. The one, I love the moment where I forget her name, but the bedridden woman is like, she lies, that one lies, when she's talking about Poppy. Yeah. That's a great moment for Olivia to realize like, and it's so interesting the way that the house is kind of like, it's fed off these people, but these people still have agency, it seems like, to the point that like they're sort of up against each other in here. And then we sort of see more agency as we get to nearing the end with Abigail and how she shows like they're over her dead body, and then we see her as a spirit. And the same thing happens for Hugh. He sees down at the bottom of the staircase, he sees Olivia, and then he sees her spirit or whatever standing over top of her body. And
yeah, there's also I wrote down Chekhov's rat poison. It kept getting zoomed in on a lot when he bought it. You're like, something bad's happening with this rat poison. And I love that it's actually a nice subversion of that expectation, and that it gets used more than once. It is used for the tea party, and then once again later it's what Luke shoots into his arm. Yeah. Shooting poison into his arm, which is something that got said earlier. Mm-hmm. So I like that it was used both times. The black mold in the red room, really interesting touch, right? Like it's just this simple room with like a carpet on the ground, and there's just a black mold on all the walls, which reminds me of Resident Evil 7. If anyone played that game, I was having flashbacks to that game. But
it's also like, we've gotten the reveal of the red room at this point, where everything that everyone's seen, like the dance room, the treehouse, all of these different rooms, all along was this. And it made me think of the room of requirement from
I think
Harry
that might
Potter
be in the next episode, but that's fine. Okay. That reveal does come, and it's very interesting, right? That the red room, they've each been in the red room at different moments. Mm-hmm. Which I didn't realize. Like when they said like that the treehouse didn't exist, I was just like, well, what the fuck was the treehouse? I didn't realize it was the red room.
Yeah, it doesn't make a ton of sense, because in order to go to a treehouse, normally you have to be outside of the house. But
yeah, but I mean, like obviously everybody was kind of like in a fugue state while they're walking around in this house, so they like dreamt that they were outside, or they dreamt that they were in wherever. And I did actually, I thought that was that's the kind of stuff, that ambiguity is good, and like I could have dealt with a little more of that, honestly. I really like that stuff.
So the tea party, I do just want to touch on it one more time, is super fucked up and scary. I can only imagine if I was younger, like seeing this and thinking of like a parent taking you and your friends into a room and having a little fun tea party, and then finding out that all along she had wanted to kill you. And
her wanting her kids to wake up reminded me a little bit of an Inception, right?
Yeah,
like, we've got to wake up, this is all a dream.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I don't know. It was a similar kind of vibe, and like, yeah, if someone ever tells you that you need to wake up and drink this tea I've made you, we need to wake up. Like, be worried.
Right. All right. So we've started talking about it a little bit, but episode 10 is called Silence Lay Steadily. Stephen and Hugh find Luke unconscious in the Red Room. Stephen, Theo, and Shirley all become locked inside with Luke and all experience revelatory nightmares about their lives as the house tries to kill them. All the siblings are saved by Nell's ghost. They awaken to find Luke dying. Nell's ghost explains that the Red Room is the stomach of the house and can disguise itself as different rooms to each person to calm them while it digests them. It disguises itself as the treehouse for Luke, the gaming room for Stephen, and so on. The siblings apologize for not saving Nell, and she assures them that they all loved each other. Olivia's ghost keeps the siblings trapped, not wanting them to leave. Hugh convinces her to open the door, telling her he will make her a promise. She frees them, and the aftermath of her death is revealed, including the fact that the Dudleys were Abigail's parents. Hugh commits suicide to be with Olivia, and says goodbye to Stephen, entering the Red Room with Olivia and Nell. 2 years later, the siblings, their bonds reconciled, celebrate Luke's sobriety together with their partners.
This episode is really interesting. It is also, I think, a divisive one for people.
Endings are tough to stick the landing on.
Endings are tough. You have to make a decision for what kind of story you want to tell.
Mm-hmm.
And Mike Flanagan decided he wanted to tell a different kind of story than what The Haunting of Hill House, the book is.
For some of the characters.
I would say for all of the characters.
Yeah, you think that it's like more of a positive spin for the people who are together now in the house? I
think it's positive overall. He changes the final line to say whatever walks in Hill House walks together, which I don't like at all.
Well, it takes away a lot of the fear of, because like a lot of this story, the fear of it is like being alone without anywhere to turn. You're dying alone without anybody to help you. So the idea of being like in death, you have others with you. It's more peaceful.
Yeah. They are reunited in death in Hill House. Hill House, when it shows its lights at the end, it's kind of like a warm yellow that glows instead of that red we had seen before. And in some ways it felt like this is almost worse than burning down Hill House. It was like the soul of Hill House had been healed. And it was now like a happy place for these people to be. Now, I'm not saying it necessarily is happy, but like
it lost its stinger, kind of like it doesn't. It no longer is dangerous.
Yeah, I mean the Dudleys were happy when they were standing there together.
Right.
You know, at the very end when he perceives it.
They found like a cheat code in order to stay together instead of having to go through the isolation of death. Yeah, it's
a decision, you know, and I can't really fault him for it. I don't know that I would have gone that route. It is an inversion of what the book ultimately is. The book leaves you with a emptiness, with a dread and a sense of inescapable horror that Eleanor, the thing she feared most was being alone, and she is now trapped in this house alone. And she has to walk alone. That's why that line resonates so strongly, is her worst fear came true. This feels like a follow-up where you're trying to rescue Eleanor. It's like I read this book and I was so stricken with her fate that I wanted to rescue her. So when I did my adaptation, I sort of freed Eleanor in a way, and I reunited her with her family. Yeah, she's still in the house, but she's with her father and mother, and they're happy together now. Everybody's been sort of spiritually healed. The rest of the family all escapes. They seem to be on a better path in life. So it is a very happy ending for this show. And does that work better for a 10-episode Netflix series? Maybe. I don't know. I can see a pressure to do that, but it also feels like that was the story Flanagan wanted to tell. I think that Mike Flanagan empathized with Steve a lot and felt a lot like Steve, because Steve is also writing this story throughout, and I kept thinking how, like, is this kind of an insert character for Flanagan in his adaptation process? And it was like it felt very much like a person who's working through their own demons and finding a way through, and ultimately the story is about people besting their demons and not succumbing to them. This version of the story, Shirley Jackson's novel is about someone who succumbs to her demons ultimately. So it is a very big difference. What did you think of it?
With what you're trying to accomplish when a show goes to Netflix, this is probably the safer and better choice, because people are left with endings, especially with shows. They're left with endings, and I think, of course, it would be more controversial and potentially better if you go the route of, having it be really dour and like morbid and like isolating at the end. But people walk away from a happy ending like this, having gone through all this traumatic stuff, and they want to see the characters, I think, have a happy ending in a 10-hour Netflix story like this, like you said. But I agree that like it's sort of a more interesting story if you tell it with the intent of being something that's different, that people haven't seen before, and kill characters and leave them in doubt and with ambiguity.
I think there is a way you could go that has a more Pyrrhic victory feel to it. I think you can still save all the kids who escape, but you imply that instead of being happy together, the father is in hell, and that he and Eleanor and Olivia are not happy. They are trapped in a hell of Hill House. And maybe you throw the Dudleys in there too. And then you can have both ending. You can have the happiness for those who escaped and the hell for those who didn't. But he chose not to go that route, and instead it's sort of happy everywhere. And I just don't know that I like that ending for this adaptation, but I can't really fault him. It's like that at this point, that's the story he wanted to tell, and I do think it's a good one. I think that's going to be a taste thing, a personal taste thing, like whether or not people like that change. And how do you like your horror stories to end? Like how do you like to feel? If everything is very happy for me at the end of most horror stories, I tend to be kind of disappointed. Like there's something about it feels a little off. And here it was very happy. At least that's my read of it. But I will say overall the episode was good. This was the big reveal about the house, about the Red Room and what it represented. It does get a little bit magic, like dark magic to me. We had characters walking around and touching each other on the head, and like
waking each other up.
It'd wake you up or put you to sleep.
Nell really saving all of the characters was that in the end you thought it might have been Theo, but it was Nell all along.
And Screaming Mimi, she was going around touching people and like knocking them unconscious too. So like it was like there were like rules for how this magic works.
How about the time that I believe like Olivia grabs onto Hugh and he like melts, like his whole body like melts, but it's really just him going into like the same kind of fugue state outside of the Red Room. He just starts.
Are you talking about when he gets like all moldy?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's pretty dark.
Pretty dark.
Yeah, I mean, I liked it, and there was a lot to like in this episode, and I kept thinking like, okay, they're gonna land it, and really, it's just the end was a little bit too happy for my taste. But to each their own. Some people probably really like it.
I mean, I think that sets us up perfectly for the thing that we have to do at the end of these episodes. So, do you have anything else you want to touch on?
I just want to say I was noticing there was a thematic consistency to the red. There was the red room, the red door, the red underwear on Theo's girlfriend, the
red lights you mentioned, the red lights of the Hill House at one point.
Yeah, the red heroin. I think the little ball of heroin she holds out, Joey holds out is red, and I'm sure there were others. I didn't catch all of them, but it seems like it reminded me a little bit like the Sixth Sense, like a little bit of red being an important color and tying it to something, maybe a moment of temptation or something that you have to resist. They really leaned into the journey's end at lovers' meeting quote, which is from the book. And it seems like that's where they sort of got the inspiration for the lovers come together at the end and it's sort of happy. That was a false happiness that Eleanor was chasing, and that the allure and promise of meeting a lover's meeting is kind of the thing that trapped her. So it's interesting to invert it a little bit and make it kind of true. I don't know. It's okay. I will say, I thought for a moment I was about to be really mad. Started the episode. it opens with Steven writing the story, and it's like, oh yeah, we're writing the story, and I'm like, wait a minute, are we gonna like have all of this just be the second, like the sequel to the book he's writing? And like, and they feint that way, like they're going that way, but then we realize he actually is still in the house, and this is all like his hallucination he's having. And I was like, okay, you're forgiven, because I was about to get mad. I was like sharpening the pitchfork, you know. But yeah, he didn't go that route ultimately. I think he knows that would have been
I think he was playing with you on purpose. You know, there's a reason he opened it that way, because that's like something that someone may have predicted. You know, the idea of it all having
this is all just a book. Yeah, exactly. I bet you there were people on Reddit who thought that was going to be the way it was going to ultimately end. Ultimately, yeah, I did enjoy the show. I do have some problems with episode 10, and you know, whenever there was like, and it's funny how this. I don't want to spoil Dr. Sleep, but there are some moments visually that are very similar that happen in the house and what happens in Dr. Sleep, and both of them I don't like, when it comes to like bunch of like people standing around in makeup to look kind of like ghosts, and they're just standing around in a scene. Like I just don't like that look, and to me it didn't work super well here either. So I don't know, it's taste things. It's just, you know, depends on the person. So I stand by a little bit of what I said last week, but overall I think I was too harsh, and I didn't know I was about to get episode 6, which kind of blew my socks off, and then really all the episodes but the final one were very, very good. And then even the final one was good. It just personal taste wise, I don't know how I feel about it. So where are you at, like, honestly, other than just appraising, like, oh, it could go either way? Personally, how do you feel about the ending?
Oh, I mean, like I tend to agree with you. Like, I think it was the safer thing to do, the more predictable thing to do. I think it was like in fitting with the story, with so much trauma for these characters to go through. Eleanor dies like so early on. That's such a thing for the audience to live with throughout the whole series. And I think this story was like begging for audiences to get like a relief at the end. And I think that's what it was like a breath of like a relief after all of this stuff went on. Luke's dealing with addiction. It's really heavy stuff. There's like Leo's dealing with like all kinds of stuff with like having to catch pedophiles and stuff, and like just there's a lot of trauma.
Oh yeah, she leaves her gloves in the garbage at the end, like she metaphorically removing the walls between her and the world.
And I wonder if that means that she's just going to be using her powers all the time, or if it means like, is she like done with her powers?
It's like, okay, I get the metaphor, but are you just going to be opening yourself up to like a lot of shit now? Yeah. Maybe.
So ultimately, I really enjoy it, and something I was gonna say is like, if as a horror fan, if more horror shows had this sort of a detail and like attention to them, I think we would be better off. I think this is a great horror show. I'm happy that it exists in its form.
I want to see more just straight up horror shows. I know that I was saying this has some dark fantasy and stuff going on. It has a little bit of sci-fi too, and time travel, and like that's all fine, you know. Like, I think there's a movie called Triangle that is like not great, but has some really interesting ideas, and it blends a little bit of that time travel horror stuff.
Cool.
I don't know, you ever saw that movie?
No, I haven't seen that.
Yeah, people who have seen it know what I'm talking about. Like, there's a little bit of that going on in this. Like, it's cool, man. I'm glad this show exists, and I agree. I think we should get more like prestige horror pieces, you know. Like, I love a Stranger Things, which is more schlocky and fun, but while still being serious. But yeah, I want more prestige horror dramas. I'm into it.
Yeah, definitely. So that leads us to the question, right? So
yeah,
we have to ask ourselves, within this project, is the book or the show better?
Yeah, the book or the show. I went into this episode thinking slam dunk, Shirley Jackson, hands down, not even close. But man, Mike Flanagan made a run for it. I can see why there's hype for this guy. I felt like I hadn't quite understood it yet, but I think this second half of the series shows me why there is, you know, people have affection for him, and they see a lot of potential. They see a lot of, you know, not just potential, like he's done some greatness. And I can see why people love it. And I'm more of a fan now than I think I ever was before. But still, all that being said, there's just enough with my personal tastes that don't align with what he chose to do. I can respect it and still say I think Shirley Jackson's novel is the superior version of this story, ultimately.
Yeah, so I had high expectations going into the novel, right? It's because I'd seen the show and I was excited to get into the novel, and then the novel blew me away. And I was like, wow, this is, and then through our conversation too, it just like heightened how much I loved that story. And while it is sort of a simple story, it's almost the origin of a lot of this stuff, of a lot of this haunted house stuff.
One of the best haunted house stories of all time,
right?
like widely regarded.
And like we've talked about through this episode, the way that it like has so much more in it. There's so much depth to it. There's a lot to think about. There's a lot of different like just seeing like character pieces and seeing like how she played with these archetypal characters that are kind of that time and did something different. And the house really is an entity into itself, and in this one maybe a little in the series maybe a little less so. It seemed like the inhabitants of the house were more the threat rather than the house itself. But for all those reasons, I'm going to take the book.
Yeah, I agree with that.
For all those reasons, I'm taking the book as well. But like everything you said, I love this show. I'm glad that it exists. Mike Flanagan, I think, created something that obviously they made Bly Manor after this. He created something that a lot of people responded to, and I'm happy to think like with like a platform like Netflix that everybody has around Halloween when this dropped, that like tons of people were introduced to a new kind of horror, or there's just like a great horror story, and like maybe they were able to, you know, from there go explore other horror stories. So just overall great stuff. I'm taking the book.
He got great performances out of these actors too.
And the child actors too.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff there. You know, very impressed.
Yeah.
But it sounds like we are both book on this one. You know, all hail Shirley Jackson,
all hail.
The great. So we will announce our very next project at the end of the episode, so stick around for that. But in the meantime, if you enjoyed this episode, please let us know in the form of a rating and review on whatever podcatcher you used. If you are on YouTube, throw us a like, maybe a comment, and let us know that you enjoyed it. We do try to respond to those when they're good.
Yeah. Also, if you wanted to support this podcast, we have a patreon.com/ink2film, and we have all kinds of tiers on there, but our $2 tier gets you our bonus content monthly. We have like 30 something episodes at this point, and typically we do
36, I think.
36. We do adaptation adjacent things normally, something similar to what we've covered before, but recently we've done more video content. We did Scott Pilgrim versus the World, the video game. We streamed some of that, and then we released sort of a talk about it after a review basically after, because we had already tackled both of those forms of that story. And then we also did a tier ranking list recently, so a lot of fun stuff going on over there. Please support us if you like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And shout out to Colton B for being a Patreon supporter for a long time now. Your continued support definitely helps us keep this thing going. Make sure to connect with us on social media. We are on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, all of those at Ink2Film, and we also have a group on Goodreads where we post discussion threads for every book we cover. And thank you to Yivik Abhishek for his track Broken Piano, which serves as our intro and outro music for this episode. Okay, so here we are at the end of the episode. We are actually going to be taking 2 weeks off. I'm going to be releasing some From the Vault content, which you will be seeing. Former Patreon episodes. Yeah, so you're getting a taste for like the kind of stuff that we do release on Patreon. They're like back from 2019 at this point, so they're if you want to get it fresher, go to Patreon. But you'll get a taste for it. But that's because James, you're going to be working on a feature film, so yeah, you're going to be busy. I'm going to be very busy. Yeah. So thank you guys for your understanding, and we will be back in 2 weeks with our new content, which is going to be covering Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five. Yeah, which I'm so pumped for. One of my favorite authors. Vonnegut is just it's such a gem. I'm so excited to get to share that author with you. That's what it feels like, and get to share it with our listeners. I'm excited. And I will say, if at all possible, read a physical copy of the book. There are illustrations, which I think are paramount to the experience. You want to appreciate. So I'm sure the audiobook's fine, but I would definitely recommend having a physical copy. Speaking of, I actually added a hardcover and a paperback version to our bookshop. If you wanted to support the podcast and get your copy on there, you'll have plenty of time for it to arrive by the time we're covering it. That would be awesome. But yeah, Slaughterhouse-Five. Many people read it in school. I think that's when I first read it. Maybe you didn't, but if you didn't, check it out. Great book. And then there's like a 70s adaptation that I actually hear good things about. So we're going to dive into that. I know nothing about it. So yeah, super excited. I'm looking forward to it too. And until next time, keep adapting.